Collaboratory is a partnership for the advancement of intercollegiate dialogue on the teaching of languages and cultures, driven by language centers and institutes at the University of Iowa, the University of Michigan, the University of Minnesota, Michigan State University, and the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Our aim is to provide collaborative professional learning opportunities for educators of language, culture, and literature at the 5 institutions, and of course, other institutions as well. The Language Collaboratory's fall sessions focus on situating language programs, language learning, and instruction in the rapidly changing world society, responding to the needs and wants of spaces beyond the classroom. Specifically, our discussants will address elevating career readiness in the language curriculum, promoting service learning and other forms of community engagement, innovation, articulating the value of transferable skills and competencies gained during one's language learning journey, and other ways of preparing students for success after they graduate. You are invited to contribute to what we hope will be a lively discussion. The sessions will be recorded and made available through the YouTube channel for the Language Collaboratory. We encourage you to subscribe to our channel to receive updates when new content is available. We ask that you mute your microphone at the outset, that you use the tools in Zoom to contribute questions and comments in a chat. During the open discussion period, please raise your hand virtually prior to activating your mic. Closed captioning is available through the live transcript button in the Zoom menu bar. Today, we will hear from Dr. Felix Kronenberg, Director of the Center for Language Teaching Advancement and Associate Professor of German in the Department of Linguistics, Languages, and Cultures at Michigan State University, and Dr. Wanske, a techno-pedagogical counselor at CeLTA Heritage College in Canada, and a part-time professor of German at the University of Ottawa. The title of today's session is Designing a New Language Curriculum from the Ground Up. A little bit about the session. Once the curriculum is in place, it is difficult to radically change it. There's a certain inertia to these educational spaces of enclosure, as written in Edwards and Usher in 2008. Curricula often enshrine educational philosophies, methodologies, and approaches for decades. What if you can design a completely new curriculum? Our 2 panelists today will describe and discuss exactly such a process, its practical implications, the resistance encountered, and the benefits gained. And before we begin, I would like to encourage everyone to attend our next session, which will be held next week, Thursday, November 3rd at the same time. We will welcome Rebecca Pryor-Perret, who is Associate Vice Chancellor in Career Development at Washington University in St. Louis. And the title of her talk will be Marketable Language Competencies. And again, this is going to be a conversation. After today's session, you will receive an email inviting you to provide feedback about the session. We really appreciate your comments. And now, with no further ado, let's begin.
All right, I'm just going to share my screen here. Share. Okay. All right, here we go. Yeah, thank you for the introduction, and Wanske and I will talk about our experiences, what we've learned over this multi-year project, and I think the reason why we're talking about this is that, usually we don't get to design curricula. Usually we inherit them, and then maybe we change a course, we add a course, we change maybe a level, the 300 level, the 200 level, but to actually design a completely new curriculum is something that rarely happens, and certainly is something we're not trained for. And that's something, especially in this series that's about postgraduate success, is something that we usually don't get trained in until we do it. And so when we did this, we were complete newbies. There was no manual, no guidebook, and very little advice on how to do this. It's also a really lengthy project, so we'll just talk about that, and hopefully you get some, if you get to do it, you have some advice and someone to turn to, but also we'll talk a little bit about how you can use this for postgraduate success and actually market your skills that you might gain with this. So I just wanted to put up this quote here about the education spaces of enclosure of the book, the classroom, and the curriculum. They have always worked to enclose meaning and experience such as learning such that learning becomes the extraction of a singular canonical understanding, and teaching the exercise the authority in terms of correct interpretation and accuracy. And it's interesting that a curriculum really sends us in a certain direction, and there's a certain rigidity to it. Once it's in place and you're supposed to teach an advanced grammar course, that is what you will do, because that's what you get paid for to do. And so the curriculum is very important. And I think when Wanske and I started at Rhodes, we don't even know who wrote the curriculum, but it must have been decades old. And we thought, let's change this, young and naive as we were and are. And so we'll tell you a little about why we took this on and what the experiences were. One quick thing too, as a basis of this, is just to explain for those of you who don't know what the two-tier structure is. The two-tier structure in languages has been critiqued for quite some time, but it's essentially, saying language education comes first, and then we do content, usually literature and education after that. And that it's really something called a basic language program at bigger universities, often taught by more junior faculty members or graduate students or contingent faculty, and then the upper division courses with the quote-unquote content by the more senior folks. And this was something that we certainly wanted to overcome, and we all should try to do that. There were a couple of challenges that we saw in the curriculum as we had it, and it was nothing special. It was a curriculum like most colleges have and had. And we looked at many college German and language curricula, and they were all very, very similar in their structure. There was very little flexibility. Students had to take one course after the other. If you missed it in the sequence, it was very hard to get back in. We noticed that the K through 12 pipeline was kind of broken as more and more high schools cut their German programs, and we had fewer and fewer students coming in with any language skills, taking placement tests, etc. We knew that the vast majority of our students were not interested in graduate studies in German, and yet our curriculum was designed in a way as if we were creating mini PhDs and future German professors, which certainly did not reflect the reality, and probably doesn't at most institutions. The vast majority of our majors were double majors, and we have data too from other universities that most language majors are double majors. We offered a lot of directed inquiries, which were independent study courses, which were taught by us, but they were not counted as teaching a course. So there were a lot of extra labor that we did, especially in the upper division courses, just to allow students to graduate. There were some access and equity issues that we had. One access and equity issue was that German was a language that is only offered, not only, but in the majority offered in high schools that are private or that are better funded. And a lot of students that came to us without a German any kind of experience were almost not able to fulfill the language requirement and actually go on to minor or major, especially without study abroad, which was the other equity issue. If you couldn't do that, if you didn't have the funds or the ability to go abroad, it was almost impossible. We actually did the math, impossible to do a major. And so of course numbers were down because of that. We also looked at other programs in the humanities at our college, and because in our language program and almost all language programs in the US, we did not count the first 2 years of the language. And so if you added those 2 years to our students, it was by far the program with the most required credits. And so of course, that is not a way to attract students, to tell them you have to take extra courses for this major. And so we also wanted to make sure that this aligns with other humanities that were taught, so that we were quite competitive to attract students. And we also wanted to validate that language study, even at the 101 level, is an intellectual endeavor that is not easy, quite the opposite. It's actually very hard work to do. And just because we might talk about very basic things like food and colors and numbers doesn't mean that intellectual work isn't happening. And we found it quite astonishing that we as language educators didn't acknowledge our own courses as worthy of counting towards the major, which, as we looked at all the other disciplines at our college, they all counted 101s, 102 courses, etc. So we wanted to just align that and also tell students what you're doing in our language courses is worthy of the major. So our goals were to attract more students to be able to complete a major and minor. We wanted to meet students' goals and needs. We also wanted them to build a lifelong passion through our courses. We wanted to have a curriculum that we could track and assess more easily. And we also wanted to do something that was coherent and unified and kind of made sense as a whole curriculum. So what we actually did was we looked at many different programs and saw what other colleges and universities did. We found that at Franklin and Marshall College, Jennifer Redman had done some great work in this area, and she also reformed their curriculum, and their numbers went up. And so instead of inviting her, we actually flew out there, and you see us there in the middle. The three of us German faculty flew out there and visited their classes, talked to the students without any other professors, and just listened, and then used it as a basis of transforming our curriculum. And that's where Wanske will tell us a little more about.
Yes, and I love the picture of us on a plane without masks on or anything. That's also a very nice reminder. So yes, so we went,
Do you want me to go back? There we go.
One slide, yes. So on our trip to Franklin and Marshall, we had the opportunity, as Felix said, to observe classes, to really speak to students, also to get, because ultimately when we were thinking of redesigning our program, we were thinking of our students. So this was a very student-centered endeavor, trying to make it feasible for them to become German majors and minors, and to actually give them real, things that they would want to take away from our program. And so the basic principles for our new curriculum were that the major begins at point of placement. So just what Felix was talking about, not having that two-tiered split, but rather have them, so if they come in at 101 or if they come in at 301 at that level, they can still complete a major or a minor. And all German courses can count towards that major and minor. And part of that rationale was that, not, as Felix had said, not counting those beginning level courses devalues language learning and contributes to the two-tiered system, which we really wanted to get away from. And Felix and I are going to talk about marketing this a little bit later, but we were in a lovely modern languages department. And so for us, we did the pilot project basically of this, of trying to see whether this approach can work at our college within a modern languages department. And so we gave our students more flexibility to completing a major and a minor. So we had the two tracks, and on the next slide in 1 second, I'll show you more about that. But it was a clearer and more coherent course structure as well, because it's also, again, not just in the marketing, but from every angle at the college, the academic advising, to the student's perspective, to the faculty, to other programs looking at our program. Having that coherent course structure and being able to articulate that and market that was key, I think, in the success of the implementation of the curricular redesign. All right, I think, Felix, if you can move to the next slide, that would be helpful. So this is a little fact sheet we put together for our German major and minor. So we listed the requirements, and we split it up into two tracks. So one track is the German language and culture track, which I should mention both tracks. It's 9 courses for the major and 6 courses for the minor. So we kept that the same across both of those tracks, but then the students could go slightly more into one or the other direction should they want to. The German language and culture course track, you could only substitute, I believe it's one course taught in English versus the German studies approach, which takes a little bit more of an interdisciplinary approach as well. So they could substitute up to 2 courses taught in English. Felix, did you want to add anything about the structure of the major?
Just in general, it was so complicated before that even as faculty, we sometimes as advisors didn't know like what courses to take when and how many and all accounting, all of that. And so we wanted to just make this really easy. So the idea was a 3, 6, 9. So 3 were the, you had to take 3 courses to meet the language requirements, then another 3 courses and you got the minor, and another 3 to do the major. So it was very easy to like memorize and also visualize, okay, you do this more and you have the minor. And so that was something just to make it easier, both for us, but also for all the students to see this is how it works. Some of the curricula we saw were just so complicated, what course to take before which one and when and how to make it all work. This was quite easy for the students to plan. That was part of the goal.
And just a little note on the literacy-based approach that we then took. So for example, I taught German 101. So the very first course that a lot of our students would take. And I gave it the focus of art and art history. So my students, they came in not knowing pretty much any German, maybe a little bit. But by the end of it, they were able to, we had a final project. They were able to describe works of art in German. Or give a gallery tour through. I had them do projects of walking us through a gallery of artworks, and they did all of that, obviously not in high-level German, but they did it with their limited vocabulary and grammatical structures in German 101. Their projects were great. They were very creative, and it was a great engagement with the language. And so we kept that throughout the whole curriculum, especially the beginning to intermediate and advanced language courses. So we got great projects out of that. And the feedback from the students was very, very positive because it was a very much aha moment when they finally realized that through all the scaffolding of the course, they were then able to talk about art in German or other topics as well. And so I think you can pull up the next slide.
Yeah, and just to, because we talk about we a lot, so we wanted to just acknowledge our colleague, Dr. Elizabeth Bridges, who was the 3rd person you saw in the photo. She wasn't able to talk today on this panel, but we just wanted to acknowledge her as well in this.
Exactly, yes. Yep. It was also, I think, something that made this process really interesting too, was collaborating so closely with colleagues on this, and then pushing it through the different committees and actually getting it to be real and to be implemented at our college. And so I think we should also give a shout out to Dr. Michelle Matson for that, because in the beginning stages, she was also very helpful for us to do that. But so from the conception of the project to the article that you see here, it was several years, and it was a lot of, I think, persistence on our part to push this through. So I just, if you're thinking of a major revision, even just a course revision or redesign, all of this, it can be a lengthy process. It's very worthwhile. But once we did that, I was interviewed by Lydia Tang for an article in MLA's Profession, titled Against Smallness, How Successful Language Programs Reimagine the Humanities. And it was a great project by Lydia, just to interview people about how they did it in their language programs. So that highlighting also small language programs, because the reality is right now in North America, there are a lot of small language programs, and how to reimagine them and how to make them successful within the current context in higher education.
I wanted to mention this book too, that we're currently editing, and that some people in the audience are actually contributing book chapters to. It's on language program vitality in the United States, from surviving to thriving in higher education. Will be published this coming summer, around hopefully when the final editing phase in Springer, and there are a lot of examples of other ways of redoing curricula. So if you're interested in this, look out for this book coming. It's an edited volume with Springer. And I guess we can do some conclusionary remarks and then have some question and answer about it. And just a few things of, if this is worthwhile and how long this takes and all of that. I just wanted to say, I think it took us about 3 years almost from like beginning to think about it to actually getting this signed off. And, you learn a lot dealing with the dean's office, dealing with the committee, dealing with the colleagues in other languages who all of a sudden see you not just as a colleague, but as competition. And I think you've all heard this when people from language X and language Y all of a sudden say, well, if you're doing that, you're going to take our students. And we said, well, maybe you should reform it too if it's successful. Or, if it's not successful, maybe we're losing our students to you. So there was some kind of competition, and there was some discussions. Well, if we have the structure in German, shouldn't Spanish and French have the same structure too? So there were quite a lot of discussions, both official, but then also private conversations of how people felt about this, because there's certainly not everyone felt good about, not about counting the first year in language and the second year, for example. People thought you need this as a basis for literary study. So there were quite a lot of colleagues who also saw this differently. We wanted to say that, but it was something that we could learn about.
And I think just to add to that, so as Felix mentioned, the process of the program redesign took about 3 years, and then the actual implementation took place. So just to not underestimate that then you redesign your courses or you make new courses from scratch. And so to think about that also as you redesign a curriculum, because that's also a lot of work that then comes at the tail end of pushing that revision through or redesign, which is also a lot of fun because you really get to redo your courses and think about them in a different way. And I think for me, at least in our discussions with our colleagues too, that was one of the great parts about this. We talked a lot about what it is that we actually do in the classroom and our programs and what the trends are in modern language education and things like that, and from all types of disciplinary perspectives and with the other languages. So even in the process, so any pushback we would get was actually pushed us further along in the process and helped us really think through what it was that we were doing there. So those discussions sometimes, pretty much all the time, were just really helpful for us and our project.
And I think we all had to compromise, even we were a small group and we all got along very well. We all knew each other quite well too. But even then, you have to compromise. Everyone comes from, has different philosophies about this and different goals. And so I think the open communication was really important. It was also important to see that this is all dependent on individuals. And, I'm not there anymore. Wanske isn't there anymore. The curriculum is still there, and it might be there for decades now. So we put our stamp on this. In some ways, there's a lot of power in this because it's really so much work to change it, right? That these curricula live on, and that was quite really important to see. The other thing was to acknowledge and learn about existing structures. None of this happens in a vacuum. You still have to give credits. You still have to submit grades. You still have to fulfill certain requirements about finals and reporting and all of these things. So there's a lot that you need to learn or will learn in the process about how the university functions. And to me, and I think for both of us, this was a really important way to really learn how academia works, something that you don't get taught. And even if you're in your position for quite some time, this really sheds some light of how stuff actually works, how some committees work, who actually has power over whom. That was really quite enlightening, and we're not, this is also being recorded, we're not going into details and names here, but that is something that can translate into something for the career. And so maybe this is not something that will show up on your CV, right? Like an article or a book might, but it is probably as much work as writing several articles. But you can probably market and package this in a way that this is amazing experience in administrative leadership in academia.
And I'll just piggyback on that. So for me, I ended up moving to Canada last year, and I started a position as a pedagogical counselor at a small college in Gatineau, Quebec. And so for me, it did end up showing up. I had to rewrite my CV. This might be interesting for the grad students. So I had to rewrite my CV to fit a more administrative slash in a way the position of a consultant at a college. And my experience that I gained through this program redesign was essential in me being able to translate those skills into my work here. So here in Quebec, I'm at a public college, and so we get the program revisions. Right now we're doing 6 or 7 at the college. We get them from the Ministry of Higher Education. And so I came into this position with thanks to my experience at Rhodes and my work with Felix and Elizabeth and Michelle on this, I came in with a way stronger background, being able to translate that into my current position. So it's a lot of work. And you really need to think about maybe how much that'll translate into what you want to do after you're done with your studies. But from my perspective, it was very worthwhile for me to get that experience. And I also like what Felix just said, it leaves a little legacy maybe at the college that, that you were at before, but it's not lost time in terms of how you can market yourself for your career later on as well.
Mm-hmm. And I have to also say that, now being at Michigan State and working with a lot with less commonly taught languages and Indigenous languages that I don't teach, but languages that often don't have the same kind of resources and curricula that maybe some of the more commonly taught languages have, has been a great experience for me too, because now I can, I know what it means to support languages that don't have a curriculum or programs that consist of only 1 or 2 faculty members and maybe don't even have a textbook for their language, what it takes to support those languages. So kind of seeing how much time actually goes into this and how much time goes into building a new program has been really enlightening. And I always, when I talk to higher level administrators, tell them it's easy to lose a language program. It's very hard to build a new one. It takes years and years to find the right people and build a curriculum. So, so I think professionally, even though it's not anywhere on my CV, it has been really influential and a really good experience. And I don't regret it. We had lots of fun too, designing all those courses and talking about it. Anything else, Monica, or do we?
No, I think we covered what we had planned to cover.
So
thank you both, Felix and Monica. We have a question from Kristen. I think we have enough time to allow for her question before we stop the recording. So I'll just pass it on to Kristen. Kristen.
Hi, thanks. I understand this is the focus is on what you can do as far as your job, and generally speaking, and not just. But I have really detailed questions about the language curriculum design that I'm very curious about. So I'll ask them, and you'll tell me if you want to address them. 2 things I just wonder, you mentioned like your introductory class, the 1001, it was a content course, so it was art and art history. And I just wonder, do you change the topic regularly? That's one question. Or do you keep the topic from year to year? And then did you find that when you were designing this, I think you mentioned there was a language requirement for your college, so everybody has to take a language. Do you think that this sort of content base where you don't have that built-in audience, but it's fully elective, would this work for programs like that? We don't have a language requirement, for example, but I would love to do a revision on the order of what you have done.
So I would say, just to your first question, so it wasn't that we marketed the course as an art or art history course. So it was still elementary German 1, I believe. And I have to say, I wasn't at the college long enough to see whether they have changed the thematic focus of the class. Because I would say it's not necessarily that was the content of the course. I would say that was the thematic focus of the course for me. Because the content was the language, all the things that go into an elementary German class, and we happen to have the thematic focus of art and art history. The way I think we conceptualized it, we were not going to this course was going to run a couple of years, regardless of who was teaching it. with that focus of art and art history. But then within that focus, of course, different professors would choose different artworks and things like that. We also, for example, our 301 course became, I believe it was German for Professional Purposes course. And so within the parameters of that, there were certain guidelines as to, learning objectives, things like that, that every professor would have to teach. But then within that structure, for example, the businesses you would pick that you would talk about and the focus you would place on different areas would be very much up to the professor. But I think the general structure of the courses would stay the same for a while.
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of it was just listening to students, what they wanted. And at a bigger school, you might do that through surveys. We actually talked to a lot of our students. We did survey them too. We talked to students at the other colleges and just finding out what do they want to do and learn. And obviously it's hard with dozens of students to find like a common denominator, but the idea was to get a little away from the book and to go more into authentic, non-childlike content that the students were craving. And some books are better than others, but we also felt that the book kind of trapped us too in a certain way. And we just wanted to update that and reflect a little of what students wanted while still delivering the language course and just kind of integrating it more. And I know there are great projects happening all over the US of doing that. Usually that's on a per course basis. So what we really did was we actually mapped out what content and what structures are important to us and how do we divvy that up over time, because that was the other thing too. Usually, a course is a discrete unit, and then often we didn't know exactly what the other person were doing. And so we didn't want students to have like duplicate information, and also make sure that at least certain things that were important to us or that we thought should be taught, that we made sure they were included at some point. Because sometimes when we tested students or assessed them, we knew that some very basic things somehow weren't covered because everyone always assumed the other person were covering them. And I think that's where the small program was really an advantage, because we were all teaching all the courses. There wasn't any division. Everyone taught from 101 till senior seminar. And that's why it's easier to do in a smaller program, but probably important for a bigger program too, that faculty actually don't just teach their one level of courses or only their grad course, etc., to actually understand what the experience is, the course of courses for the students.
And just to follow up on that, I think something that we didn't address as much in our talk just now, since we were at a small college, this also allowed for us, we were 3 professors, and so this also allowed for us having the 2 tracks to also allow other departments' courses to count to a certain extent within our major and our minor, as long as they were related to German-speaking countries and cultures. And that really helped us as a small program to be able to get by and not overextend our workload as well, because before that, they were not allowed as much to substitute any courses from other programs into our major and minor. So at bigger schools, that might not be quite the issue because you have a lot more faculty, but that might be something to consider as well.
And with that, I'm going to pause to stop the recording.